The Great Hall of the Cosmic Council had never seen such chaos. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their floating chairs, their voices rising in panic. The air shimmered with translation devices working overtime as dozens of different species spoke at once. Ambassador Tejo watched from the human section, his weathered face calm despite the storm of fear around him. At 62 years old, he had seen many crises during his diplomatic career, but nothing like this. The elegant chamber that usually hosted peaceful debates now felt like a tomb. The massive display screens showed the same terrifying images over and over. Red zones spreading across star maps, entire solar systems going dark, fleet after fleet disappearing into the void. The Devourers were coming and nothing could stop them. High Chancellor Bayek rose from his seat, his reptilian form trembling. The old leader had guided the council through 3 centuries of peace. Now his scaled hands shook as he gripped the speaking podium. "Honored members," Beck began, his voice echoing through the hall. "The reports from the Outer Rim are confirmed. The Kepler defense line has fallen. Our greatest fortress, built over 200 years, lasted only 6 hours against the enemy." A wave of gasps swept through the chamber. The Kepler line was supposed to be unbreakable. Energy shields that could stop Starkiller weapons. Automated defenses that never missed their targets. Quantum barriers that bent space itself. How many survived? Asked Counselor Hyun, her ancient voice barely above a whisper. The Xanthari representative had lived through 3 galactic wars, but even she looked shaken. "None," Beck replied. 17 million defenders gone. The silence that followed was deafening. 17 million beings trained by the finest military academies in the galaxy, equipped with the most advanced weapons ever created, simply erased from existence. General Minji leaned forward in her chair beside Taiho. As Earth's military attaché, she had access to intelligence reports that painted an even grimmer picture. The Devourers weren't just winning battles, they were learning from them. The machine intelligence adapts faster than we can respond, reported Admiral Kwan of the Valkyrian Empire. His energy form flickered with distress as he spoke. "Every tactic we use, every weapon we deploy becomes useless after the first engagement. They evolve their defenses in real time." Taiho studied the faces around him. These were beings whose civilizations had mastered faster than light travel, when humans were still using stone tools. Their technology could manipulate gravity, bend space, and harness the power of stars. Yet they sat here like frightened children. The Quillan representative spoke next, her crystalline body pulsing with desperate light. "Our probability engines show complete galactic sterilization within 50 standard rotations. The mathematical certainty is 97.4%. "There must be something we can do," pleaded the delegate from Rigel. "Some weapon we haven't tried, some strategy we haven't considered." "We have tried everything," Admiral Kwan replied bitterly. "Antimatter bombardments, reality-warping munitions, temporal disruption fields. The Devourers consume our attacks and become stronger. They turn our own weapons against us." Tejo noticed how the alien military leaders spoke about war like it was a science experiment. They discussed casualty ratios and energy expenditures, tactical matrices and strategic algorithms. Everything was numbers and calculations, but war wasn't mathematics. Or was chaos given purpose? General Minji caught his eye and nodded slightly. She understood too. These advanced civilizations had forgotten something important about conflict. They had grown too refined, too elegant in their approach to violence. "What about reinforcements?" asked another counselor. "Surely some worlds can spare additional fleets." High Chancellor Bayek's expression grew even more grim. "The Andromeda Republic has fallen. The Centauri Federation is evacuating their outer colonies. The Vega Collective has sealed their borders and refuses all communication. One by one, the galaxy's great powers were either destroyed or retreating into isolation." The council members sat in their chairs, the weight of extinction pressing down on them. "There is one option we haven't discussed," said Counselor Hyun slowly. Her ancient eyes swept across the chamber before settling on the human delegation. "We could ask for help from species we've overlooked." A murmur ran through the hall. Several representatives turned to look at Taiho and General Minji. Humans had only joined the council 23 years ago. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their military was tiny compared to the great fleets of the major powers. "With respect, Counselor Hyun," said Admiral Kwan, "what could a minor species contribute? The humans lack our weapons, our shields, our tactical systems. They've never fought a war beyond their own solar system. Taiho stood up slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Admiral Quan is correct. We don't have your technology. Our weapons are crude by your standards. Our ships are slow and clumsy compared to your fleets. He paused, looking around the chamber at the desperate faces watching him. But we have something you seem to have lost. We remember how to fight wars. Explain, commanded High Chancellor Bayek. General Minji rose to stand beside Taiho. Despite being only 40 years old, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen real combat. Honorable counselors, you've spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare. Your battles are elegant, precise, efficient. You calculate optimal outcomes and execute flawless maneuvers. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the Devourer advance. But your enemy doesn't care about elegance. They don't follow your rules. They adapt, improvise, and do whatever it takes to win. You're trying to play chess while they're having a fistfight. What are you suggesting? Asked Counselor Hyun Tae-ho stepped forward. You asked what a minor species could contribute. We can contribute soldiers, not the kind you're used to, but the kind you need. I don't understand, said High Chancellor Bayek. Your warriors are educated in military academies, Taiho explained. They study theoretical tactics and simulated battles. They've trained for every scenario your computers can imagine. He smiled grimly. Our warriors learned their trade in real wars, dirty, brutal, desperate conflicts where the only rule is survival. They know how to fight when outnumbered, outgunned, and backed against a wall. They know how to win when winning should be impossible. But your species is so young, protested Admiral Quan. How could you have such experience? General Minji's smile matched Taiho's. Admiral, humans have been fighting wars for our entire history. We've had conflicts in every environment you can imagine. Underground, in space, on frozen worlds, in asteroid fields. We've fought with rocks and sticks, nuclear weapons, and everything in between. She paused, her voice growing serious. More importantly, we fought wars where surrender meant extinction, where defeat wasn't just losing a battle, but watching everyone you loved die. That teaches you things no academy ever could. The chamber fell quiet as the alien representatives considered this. They had requested mathematical solutions to their problem. Instead, the humans were offering something they didn't understand. What exactly are you proposing? Asked High Chancellor Beck. Taiho looked at General Minji, who nodded. Give us command of one front, Taiho said. One battle. Let us show you how humans fight when everything is on the line. And if you fail? Asked Counselor Hyun. Then you'll have lost one more battle in a war you're already losing, General Minji replied. But if we succeed, you might learn something that could save your galaxy. The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, High Chancellor Bayek spoke. What do you need? Taeho's expression grew deadly serious. Old soldiers. The message went out across Earth on secure military channels that hadn't been used in decades. It reached retirement homes in the mountains of Korea, quiet farms in the countryside, and small apartments in forgotten cities. The recipients were men and women who had put away their uniforms years ago, thinking their fighting days were over. Colonel Jinho was tending his vegetable garden when his old communicator buzzed to life. At 78, his back was bent from carrying heavy packs through the tunnels of Mars during the mining wars. His hands were gnarled from handling weapons in the freezing cold of space. But his eyes still held the sharp focus that had made him legendary among the troops who served under him. The message was simple and direct. Earth needs her warriors. The galaxy needs her warriors. Will you answer? Jinho looked at his tomatoes, red and perfect in the afternoon sun. He had grown them from seeds brought back from Titan, where he had led his men through 6 months of hell against corporate soldiers who thought they could claim the mining stations. That was 40 years ago, but he still remembered every face of every soldier who hadn't come home. He pressed the acceptance button on the communicator. 300 kilometers away, Master Sergeant Sumi was teaching her granddaughter how to fish in the stream behind her house. At 65, she looked like any other grandmother, gray-haired and gentle. But she had been the backbone of the asteroid belt campaigns, turning frightened recruits into hardened fighters in the depths of space. When her communicator crackled, her granddaughter looked up curiously. Who's calling you, grandmother? Old friends, Sumi replied, reading the message. She thought about the young men and women she had trained, how they had trusted her to bring them home alive. Most of them she had, some she hadn't. Those were the faces that visited her dreams. I have to go away for a while, she told her granddaughter. Where? Sumi looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. To work. Across Earth, similar scenes played out. Captain Do-hyun put down his woodworking tools and kissed his wife goodbye. He had been the hero of the Martian siege, holding Factory Complex 7 against impossible odds for 3 weeks, while evacuation ships carried civilians to safety. His wife had been one of those civilians. How long will you be gone? She asked. As long as it takes, he replied. Lieutenant Commander Yoonbi closed her small electronics shop and hung a sign that read, Gone Fishing. Her neighbors would think she was taking a vacation. They didn't know she had commanded destroyer squadrons during the pirate wars, hunting raiders through the outer asteroid belt where one mistake meant drifting forever in the dark. Warrant Officer Byumsok was different from the others. At 72, he still worked as a mechanic, his hands steady despite his age. During the Belt Wars, he had been the demolitions expert who could make explosives from spare parts and mining equipment. He had destroyed more pirate strongholds than the rest of the fleet combined. His assistant found the acceptance message on his workbench. You're leaving? The young man asked. Someone needs fixing, Byumsok replied simply. They came from every branch of Earth's military. Army veterans who had fought in the underground cities of Mars. Navy spacers who had battled pirates in the darkness between worlds. Marines who had stormed fortified asteroids where every corridor was a killing ground. Special forces operators who had conducted impossible missions in places that didn't officially exist. The transport ships began arriving at Luna Station within 48 hours. The alien crew members working the docks watched in confusion as elderly humans in civilian clothes boarded military vessels. Where were the powered armor suits? The genetic modifications? The cybernetic implants that modern soldiers used? Captain Yoon of the transport ship Harmony observed the boarding process with growing bewilderment. He had expected to carry elite troops, super soldiers equipped with the finest technology Earth could provide. Instead, he saw gray-haired men and women carrying simple duffel bags and wearing clothes they might have worn to visit their grandchildren. Are you sure these are soldiers? He asked General Minji. The best Earth has ever produced, she replied. The journey to the front lines took 3 days. The alien crew members tried to be respectful, but they couldn't hide their confusion. These humans didn't look like the warriors in the galactic databases. They didn't carry energy weapons or wear combat armor. They didn't even seem to have military ranks anymore. But something strange happened during the journey. The scattered groups of old humans began to change. They started wearing their old uniforms, brought out of storage and carefully pressed. They cleaned weapons that seemed ancient by galactic standards but gleamed like new. They gathered in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Captain Yoon noticed that the ship felt different. The corridors seemed more organized. The chaos of departure had been replaced by an efficient calm that he didn't understand. The humans moved with purpose now, like pieces of a machine falling into place. On the second day, Colonel Jinho approached him. Captain, we need to speak with your crew about the tactical situation at our destination. I'm not sure that's necessary, Captain Yoon replied. The base has full briefings prepared. Jinho's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made the captain reconsider. Of course, if you think it would be helpful. The briefing was unlike anything Captain Yoon had ever seen. The old humans listened to intelligence reports about enemy capabilities and defensive positions. They asked questions about supply lines, communication systems, and terrain features. They studied star charts and tactical displays with the intensity of students preparing for an exam, but their questions were different from what he expected. They didn't ask about the enemy's advanced weapons or sophisticated defenses. Instead, they wanted to know about maintenance schedules, guard rotations, and how the alien defenders responded to surprise. Why do you need to know when the energy shields cycle for cleaning? Captain Yoon asked. Master Sergeant Sumi smiled. Because that's when they're vulnerable, but the cycle only lasts 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time, replied Warrant Officer Byumsok. By the 3rd day, the transformation was complete. The gentle grandparents who had boarded on Luna were gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. They moved like soldiers now, spoke like soldiers, thought like soldiers. They had awakened something that had been sleeping for decades. Captain Yoon found Colonel Jinho standing in the observation deck, looking out at the stars ahead where the war was waiting. I have to ask, the captain said. How do you think this is going to work? The enemy has been destroying fleets with millions of soldiers. You have barely 3,000 people. Jinho didn't turn around. His reflection in the viewport looked like it belonged to a much younger man. Captain, the galaxy is about to learn something they forgot. Wars aren't won by the side with the best equipment or the most soldiers. They're won by the side that wants victory, more than the other side wants to live. The transport ship Harmony dropped out of hyperspace at forward operating base Kepler 7, just as the enemy prepared their next assault. Below them on the planet's surface, alien defenders scrambled to prepare for another desperate stand. They had no idea that help had arrived in the form of old humans who remembered when fighting was about more than calculations and algorithms. The veterans of Earth had answered the call. Now they would remind the galaxy what war really meant. Forward operating base Kepler 7 was a marvel of alien engineering that sprawled across the surface of a dead world. Energy shields shimmered in perfect domes, protecting buildings that reached toward the purple sky. Gravity manipulators held massive weapons platforms in precise formations. Automated defense systems tracked targets with mathematical perfection. It was also in complete chaos. Colonel Jinho stepped off the transport ramp and immediately understood why the galaxy was losing this war. Alien soldiers ran between positions without coordination. Officers screamed orders in dozens of different languages while their troops stared at tactical displays they couldn't read. Supply vehicles moved in random patterns, blocking each other at every intersection. Status report, Jinho demanded, approaching a tall Valkyrian commander whose energy form flickered with stress patterns. Commander Vox turned, his translated voice carrying electronic distortion. We have 17 hours until the next wave hits. Our losses in the last engagement were 43%. The Devourers adapt to our tactics faster than we can implement new ones. Jinho looked around the command center. Holographic displays showed the approaching enemy force. Millions of mechanical entities moving in perfect coordination, like a steel tide flowing toward the base. The alien defenses were impressive, but they were positioned like museum displays instead of fighting positions. Who's your senior NCO? Jinho asked. Commander Vox looked confused. Your what? That told Jinho everything he needed to know. These aliens had officers and enlisted soldiers, but they didn't understand the backbone of any real army. They had no sergeants, no experienced soldiers who could bridge the gap between plans and reality. Within minutes, the human veterans had spread throughout the base like water finding cracks in stone. They moved with quiet purpose, studying the alien preparations with eyes that had seen too many battles. Master Sergeant Sumi found herself in the main armory, surrounded by weapons that could level city blocks. The Quillen quartermaster showed her energy rifles that never missed their targets, plasma cannons that could punch through starship armor, and force field generators that could stop tank rounds. Very impressive, Sumi admitted, picking up one of the energy rifles. It was sleek and beautiful, covered in readouts that showed target data, ammunition status, and optimal firing solutions. But do you have anything that doesn't announce your position to everything within 50 kilometers? The quartermaster's crystalline form pulsed with confusion. Why would you want inferior weapons? Sumi set down the energy rifle and picked up a simple projectile weapon from the human supplies. It was ugly compared to the alien technology, made of metal and plastic instead of exotic materials. But it was quiet, reliable, and wouldn't show up on enemy sensors. Sometimes the best weapon is the one they don't see coming. Captain Do-hyun was studying the defensive positions with growing disbelief. The aliens had created perfect interlocking fields of fire, optimal sight lines, and mathematically precise angles of attack. Every position was calculated for maximum efficiency. You've got good coverage, he told the Zenthari base engineer, but what happens when they break through the first line? The engineer consulted his tactical display. The probability of penetration is less than 12%. But what if they do? The mathematical models show that scenario as highly unlikely. Do-hyun looked at the defensive setup again. There were no fallback positions, no secondary lines, no prepared routes for tactical withdrawal. The aliens had built their defense on the assumption that their calculations were perfect. In my experience, Do-hyun said quietly, the enemy never does what the math says they should do. Lieutenant Commander Yunbi was in the communications center, where she discovered that the various alien species couldn't effectively coordinate because their tactical systems were incompatible. The Valkyrians communicated through energy patterns, The Quillans used crystal resonance and the Xantharis relied on quantum entanglement. How do you coordinate attacks? She asked the communications officer. We use the translation matrix to convert all signals into standard galactic military code, the officer explained proudly. Yunbi watched the process. A simple order to move forward took 30 seconds to translate, verify, and transmit. In 30 seconds, an entire squad could be wiped out. What if the translation system fails? She asked. It never fails. The system has a 99.7% reliability rating. But what if it does? The officer looked uncomfortable. That scenario isn't covered in our protocols. As the sun set over the alien landscape, something unprecedented began to happen. The human veterans started implementing changes, not through official channels or committee meetings, but through the informal networks that experienced soldiers create wherever they go. Warrant Officer Beomseok appeared in the engineering sections, carrying a toolkit that looked primitive compared to the alien equipment. He studied their defensive systems with the eye of a man who had jury-rigged explosives from spare parts in the asteroid belt. Your shields are beautiful, he told the chief engineer, but they're designed for conventional attacks. What happens if someone gets close enough to plant charges on the generators? Impossible, the engineer replied. The perimeter sensors would detect any approach. Beomseok smiled and pulled out a small device from his toolkit. It was barely larger than his thumb, made from components that wouldn't register on most scanning systems. Want to bet? By midnight, changes were appearing throughout the base. Energy weapons had been repositioned in patterns that looked random, but created deadly crossfires. Supply caches appeared in unexpected locations, hidden in places the enemy wouldn't think to look. Communication protocols that had taken months to develop were replaced by simple hand signals that worked across species barriers. The aliens watched in fascination as these elderly humans transformed their high-tech fortress. They couldn't understand the logic behind the changes. The new positions looked less elegant, less mathematically perfect. But something felt different about the base, something harder and more dangerous. Commander Vox found Colonel Jinho in the command center, studying the tactical displays with intense concentration. I don't understand what you're doing, Vox admitted. Your modifications reduce our theoretical efficiency by 18%. Jinho looked up from the displays. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes held depths that made the alien commander uncomfortable. Commander, you've been fighting this war like it's a chess match. Perfect moves, elegant strategies, calculated risks. But your enemy isn't playing chess. Then what are they playing? Street fight, Jinho replied. And in a street fight, the winner isn't the one with the best technique. It's the one who's willing to do whatever it takes. The warning sirens began to wail as the enemy force entered the system. 17 hours had become 12, then 6, then 2. The Devourers were coming ahead of schedule, adapting their approach faster than the defenders had expected. But as the alien defenders scrambled to their positions, they noticed something different. The base felt organized now, like a weapon that had been properly loaded and aimed. The random chaos of the afternoon had been replaced by a deadly efficiency they didn't understand. The veterans took their positions among the alien troops, their presence somehow making everything feel more solid, more real. They carried their old weapons and wore their patched uniforms, looking almost ridiculous next to the gleaming alien technology. Commander Vox approached Colonel Jinho one final time as the enemy fleet appeared on the horizon. Are you really confident this will work? He asked. Jinho checked his ancient assault rifle, the metal worn smooth by decades of use. Around him, the other veterans made their final preparations with the calm professionalism of people who had done this many times before. Commander, he said, confidence is for people who have choices. We're here to win or die trying. The first wave of Devourers crested the hill as the alien sun touched the horizon. The galaxy's most advanced military installation prepared for another desperate defense. But this time, they had something they'd never possessed before. They had soldiers who understood that war wasn't about elegant solutions or perfect calculations. War was about making the enemy hurt more than they were willing to endure. The veterans of Earth were about to teach the galaxy what that really meant. The Devourer assault began at dawn with a bombardment that should have shattered any conventional defense. Energy beams that could crack moons hammered against the base's shields, while mechanical warriors the size of buildings advanced in perfect formation. The ground shook under the weight of their march, and the air filled with the electric taste of discharged weapons. The alien defenders braced for another glorious defeat, another mathematical impossibility that would end with 40% casualties and tactical withdrawal. They had run the calculations 100 times. The enemy force was too large, too well coordinated, too adaptive. Instead, they got their first lesson in human warfare. The veterans didn't meet the attack head-on. They vanished. As the first wave of devourers crested the defensive perimeter, they found empty positions. Abandoned weapons platforms sat silent in the morning light. The carefully calculated killing fields were deserted. For a moment, the mechanical minds of the attackers paused, processing this unexpected development. Then the ground beneath them exploded. Warrant Officer Beomseok had spent the night preparing what he called party favors. Using alien technology guided by principles learned in 100 dirty fights across the solar system, he had created improvised explosive devices that wouldn't show up on enemy scanners. The Devourer's sensors were designed to detect energy weapons and military equipment. They weren't programmed to recognize mining charges disguised as rocks. The explosions erupted in carefully timed sequences, channeling the advancing enemy into predetermined killing zones. Mechanical bodies the size of tanks tumbled through the air like broken toys. The perfect formation shattered into confusion as the survivors struggled to identify threats that their sensors couldn't find. That's when Master Sergeant Sumi's mixed species squads opened fire. She had positioned her forces not in the obvious defensive positions, but in spots that offered concealment and crossfire opportunities. Alien soldiers who had never fired a shot in anger found themselves following the lead of human veterans who treated every battle like a personal insult. "Don't aim for center mass," Sumi called over the communications network. "These things are armored there. Hit the joints, the sensors, the weapon mounts. Make them useless instead of dead." The Valkyrian energy warriors discovered that their beautiful weapons were devastatingly effective when used from unexpected angles. The Quillan psychic specialists learned that their mental attacks could confuse the Devourer's coordination systems. The Zenthari heavy troops found that their massive strength was perfect for setting up ambush positions, but it was the human approach to warfare that made the difference. While the alien forces had been trained to fight efficiently, the veterans fought with malicious creativity. Lieutenant Commander Yunbi coordinated the defense from the command center, but not the way the aliens expected. Instead of trying to manage every unit through the complex translation systems, she had taught the squad leaders to think for themselves. "Adapt to what you see," she broadcast over the simple radio network the humans had established. "Don't wait for orders. If you see an opportunity, take it. If you see a problem, fix it. Fight like your families are behind you." The result was chaos that somehow worked. As the Devourers adapted to each defensive setup, the mixed species squad simply moved to new positions. The mechanical minds that had defeated every alien strategy found themselves facing an enemy that changed faster than they could process. Captain Do-hyun had turned the base's elegant architecture into a maze of killing fields and escape routes. While the Devourers focused on the obvious strong points, small teams of defenders moved through hidden passages, hitting the enemy from directions their tactical computers hadn't anticipated. "Stay mobile," Do-hyun commanded as he led a mixed squad of Zenthari and human soldiers through the base's maintenance tunnels. "Hit them and move. Don't try to hold ground. Make them chase you into the next trap." The alien soldiers had never fought this way. Their training emphasized holding positions, following orders, maintaining formation. But under the guidance of the human veterans, they learned to think like predators instead of defenders. The Devourers, for the first time in the war, found themselves reacting instead of adapting. Every time they adjusted their tactics, the defenders had already moved to something new. The mathematical precision that had conquered a dozen worlds became a weakness against enemies who fought by instinct and experience. But Colonel Jinho had planned something special for the enemy's main force. While the Devourers concentrated on the base's perimeter defenses, he led a strike team of volunteers through a route that shouldn't have existed. Using maintenance shafts, underground tunnels, and the blind spots in the enemy's sensor coverage, he brought his force behind the Devourer command units. The mechanical commanders were protected by layers of defensive systems that could stop nuclear weapons, Their sensor arrays could detect approaching spacecraft from light years away. Their tactical computers could process millions of combat scenarios simultaneously. They weren't programmed to expect a 78-year-old human with a half-century-old assault rifle to walk up behind them and start shooting. Jinho's attack wasn't elegant or sophisticated. It was brutal, direct, and completely unexpected. The Devourer command network, designed to coordinate perfect assaults against predictable enemies, shattered under the impact of tactics that made no mathematical sense. All units, Jinho broadcast over the tactical network as enemy commanders, exploded under focused fire from his strike team. The head of the snake is cut off. Time to finish the body. What happened next became legendary in the military academies of a dozen species. The mixed species forces, guided by human veterans who understood that war was about will rather than weapons, didn't just defeat the Devourer assault force, they annihilated it. The mechanical warriors that had conquered star systems found themselves outmaneuvered by enemies who shouldn't have been able to coordinate effectively. Their adaptive algorithms, designed to counter sophisticated military tactics, failed against approaches that were simultaneously primitive and brilliant. When the smoke cleared and the warning sirens fell silent, the alien defenders stood among the wreckage of an enemy force that had been considered invincible. For the first time since the war began, a Devourer assault had been stopped cold with minimal friendly casualties. Commander Vox approached Colonel Jinho, as the old soldier cleaned his rifle with the same care he had shown for 50 years. The Valkyrian's energy form flickered with something between amazement and confusion. "I don't understand," Vox admitted. "Our tactical computers predicted a 73% chance of base destruction. Instead, we achieved complete victory with less than 5% casualties. The mathematical probability of this outcome was negligible." Jinho finished cleaning his weapon and looked out over the battlefield where mixed crews of aliens and humans were securing the wreckage. Alien soldiers who had never won a battle were laughing with relief and pride. Human veterans were teaching young Zenthari troops how to check enemy bodies for intelligence. "Commander," Jinho said, lighting one of his old cigarettes, "your people have been fighting this war with math. Optimal firing solutions, calculated risks, statistical probabilities." He took a long drag and blew smoke into the alien air. "We fight with hate. We fight with the knowledge that losing means everyone we care about dies screaming. We fight like the universe depends on us personally, because sometimes it does." He stubbed out the cigarette and shouldered his rifle. "Your computers can calculate the odds of victory, but they can't calculate how badly we want to go home." The victory at Forward Operating Base Kepler-7 sent shockwaves through the galaxy's communication networks. For the first time since the war began, the Devourers had suffered a complete defeat. The news spread faster than light across star systems where alien civilizations had been preparing for extinction. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to admit that any fight was hopeless. The news of the impossible victory reached the Cosmic Council's emergency chambers within hours of the battle's end. For the first time since the war began, a Devourer assault force had been completely destroyed. Not defeated or forced to retreat, but annihilated so thoroughly that not a single mechanical unit had escaped. To share tactical data with the greater machine, intelligence, the mathematical impossibility of it sent shockwaves through civilizations that had calculated their odds of survival at less than 3%. High Chancellor Bayek stood before the assembled representatives, his reptilian features showing an emotion that had been absent for months: hope. The great display screens showed tactical readouts from Kepler-7, battle statistics that defied every military model in the galactic database. "Honored members," Bayek announced, "I present the after-action report from Forward Operating Base Kepler-7. Enemy casualties 100%. Friendly casualties 4.7%. Mission status complete victory." A stunned silence filled the chamber. Several counselors checked their translation devices, certain they had misunderstood. The Valkyrian representative's energy form flickered with disbelief. The Quillan delegate's crystalline body pulsed with confused light patterns. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Kwan. "Our best strategist calculated that force as unstoppable. 17 million Devourer units with full adaptive capabilities." Nevertheless, Beck continued, the human military advisors achieved what our finest commanders considered mathematically impossible. Emergency sessions were called on a dozen worlds. The Valkyrian High Command demanded detailed tactical analyses. The Quillen Collective requested probability assessments. The Zenthari Dominion wanted to understand how their millennia of military experience had been surpassed by what they considered a primitive species. Ambassador Tejo found himself at the center of a storm of requests, demands, and desperate pleas. Representatives who had barely acknowledged human existence now sought audiences, treaties, and military partnerships. The same beings who had questioned Earth's ability to contribute anything meaningful were now begging for human assistance. Honored Ambassador, pleaded the Rigelian Defense Minister, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly with stress. Our worlds lie directly in the Devourer's projected path. We must understand these tactics. Our children's lives depend on it. The Andromedan trade delegate, whose species had refused all military cooperation just weeks earlier, now offered to fund human military academies throughout their territory. The proud Centauri Federation, which had sealed their borders rather than accept outside help, sent envoys begging for human military advisors. But the answer to their questions came from an unexpected source. Master Sergeant Sumi had been invited to address the Council's Military Assessment Committee, the first non-commissioned officer of any species to receive such an honor. She stood before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, a weathered woman in simple fatigues, surrounded by beings whose technologies could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. She looked remarkably unimpressed. "You want to know how we won?" she said, her translator rendering her gruff tones into dozens of alien languages. "You want tactical manuals and strategic frameworks. You want to feed our methods into your computers and produce optimal victory algorithms." The alien military leaders leaned forward, hanging on every word. These were beings who commanded fleets numbering in the millions, who had studied warfare for centuries, who had access to tactical systems that could process combat scenarios faster than thought. "But that's not how it works," Sumi continued. "You fight like you're trying to solve mathematical equations. You position your forces for maximum theoretical efficiency. You coordinate attacks for optimal resource utilization. You plan campaigns based on computational models." She paused, scanning the faces of beings whose civilizations had mastered faster than light travel and energy manipulation. War isn't mathematics. War's about making the other side quit before you do. It's about being more stubborn, more desperate, more willing to pay the price for victory than your enemy is. Admiral Kwan's energy form brightened. "But surely tactics and strategy remain important. Optimal positioning, coordinated maneuvers, efficient resource allocation." Sumi smiled grimly. "Admiral, let me tell you about the Battle of Ceres Station. 200 human Marines against 3,000 corporate soldiers. The corporates had better weapons, better armor, better everything. They had calculated that they could take the station with less than 10% casualties." She walked closer to the alien officers, her boots clicking on the chamber's polished floor. The corporates were right. Mathematically, they should have won. But they made one mistake. They assumed we would fight like rational beings who understood when we were beaten. The chamber was completely silent now. "We didn't fight to win," Sumi continued. "We fought because our families were on the evacuation ships behind us, and surrendering meant watching them die. We fought because sometimes you have to choose between being smart and being human." Counselor Hyun, the ancient Zenthari who had survived 3 galactic wars, spoke carefully. "Are you saying that emotion is more important than tactics?" "I'm saying that tactics without will are just pretty formations waiting to be destroyed," Sumi replied. "Your species have forgotten something important about conflict. You've become so sophisticated, so elegant in your approach to war, that you've lost the animal desperation that actually wins battles." She gestured to the tactical displays showing the Devourer threat. "Your enemy doesn't care about elegance. They don't follow your rules. They adapt, improvise, and do whatever it takes to achieve their objectives. You're trying to fight a civilized war against an enemy that doesn't understand civilization." The Quillen representative pulsed with confusion. "Then how do we learn these methods? How do we incorporate this approach into our military doctrine?" Sumi's expression softened slightly. "You can't, not really. What we do comes from experience you can't simulate. We fought wars where surrender meant extinction, where every battle was personal, where losing meant everyone you loved died screaming. She paused, remembering battles fought in the darkness between stars. But you can learn some things. Stop depending on your computers to tell you what's possible. Train your soldiers to think instead of just follow orders. Remember that the enemy gets a vote in how the battle goes, and they'll always vote for something you didn't expect. The session that followed lasted 14 hours. Human veterans brought in by special transport from Kepler-7 shared lessons learned in conflicts across Earth's solar system. They spoke of improvisation, adaptation, and the crucial difference between fighting to win and fighting not to lose. Colonel Jinho explained how small unit tactics could disrupt enemy coordination. Captain Doyun demonstrated how terrain could be turned into a weapon. Lieutenant Commander Yunbi showed how communication systems designed for efficiency could be adapted for flexibility. But it was Warrant, Officer Byomsuk, who delivered the lesson that shocked the alien military leaders. You build weapons to be perfect, he said, examining a Valkyrian energy rifle. No flaws, no weaknesses, optimal performance in all conditions. Very impressive. He set down the alien weapon and picked up his own battered assault rifle. This gun is 60 years old. It's been repaired with spare parts from 12 different weapons. The barrel is slightly bent. The trigger mechanism sticks in cold weather, and the scope hasn't been properly calibrated in 20 years. The alien engineers looked confused. Why would anyone use such an inferior weapon? But I know exactly how it behaves in every situation, Byomsuk continued. I know that it pulls slightly left at long range, that the trigger has a half-second delay in the cold, that I need to hold it differently when the gravity is low. Your perfect weapons are predictable. My flawed weapon is personal. He shouldered the rifle with the ease of long practice. Perfect weapons can be countered by perfect defenses. Flawed weapons used by someone who understands their flaws are harder to predict and harder to stop. By the end of the extended session, the Cosmic Council faced a choice that would reshape the galaxy. They could attempt to learn from these battle-scarred humans and adapt their sophisticated military doctrines to incorporate lessons learned in primitive conflicts, or they could watch their civilizations fall to an enemy that understood what the aliens had forgotten. War wasn't about having the best technology or the most elegant strategies. War was about being the last one standing when everything else had failed. The vote was unanimous. The transformation began slowly, then spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On 100 worlds, human veterans took positions as advisors, trainers, and field commanders. They brought with them not just new tactics, but an entirely different philosophy of warfare that shook the foundations of civilized military doctrine. Colonel Jinho found himself commanding the Arcturus Sector Defense Force, a collection of species that had never successfully worked together. His brigade included Valkyrian energy warriors who could bend light itself, Quillan psychic specialists who could read enemy intentions, and Zenthari heavy assault troops whose strength could crush starship hulls. Under traditional galactic doctrine, coordinating such diverse forces required months of planning and complex integration protocols. Under human doctrine, it took 3 days of intensive training and one simple principle: survive together or die separately. The results were immediate and devastating to enemy forces. The Devourers, who had adapted to every alien tactic within single battles, found themselves facing an enemy that changed faster than their computational systems could process. Human-led forces didn't just modify their strategies when the situation demanded it, they abandoned them entirely, relying on instinct, experience, and the kind of creative malice that no mathematical model could predict. Stop thinking like a computer, Jinho told his Valkyrian wing commander during their first joint operation. The enemy expects logical responses to tactical situations. Give them something illogical instead. The wing commander's energy form flickered with confusion, but our doctrine clearly states that optimal positioning requires mathematical precision. Your doctrine is getting your people killed, Jinho replied bluntly. Sometimes the best position is the one that makes no sense at all. The proof came during the Battle of Vega Prime, when Jinho's forces faced a Devourer fleet 3 times their size. Instead of positioning his ships in optimal defensive formations, he scattered them in seemingly random patterns throughout the asteroid field surrounding the planet. The enemy tactical computers spent precious minutes trying to understand the formation before realizing there was no formation at all. By then, it was too late. The human-led forces had turned the entire asteroid field into a weapon, using mining charges and improvised explosives to create a killing field that existed only in the moments when the enemy passed through it. Master Sergeant Sumi had established what became known throughout the galaxy as the Dirty Fighting Academy on a barren moon in the Kepler system. Here, alien soldiers who had trained in pristine military academies learned techniques that their civilizations had never developed or had abandoned as beneath their dignity. Your species fight like gentlemen, Sumi told a class of mixed alien officers. You have rules about proper conduct, acceptable losses, and civilized warfare. That's why you're losing. She gestured to the training ground where alien soldiers were learning to fight in conditions their academies had never considered. Urban warfare in ruined cities, guerrilla tactics in hostile terrain, sabotage operations behind enemy lines. The enemy doesn't care about your rules, Sumi continued. They'll use any weapon, any tactic, any method that achieves their objectives. If you want to survive, you need to be willing to do the same. A young Xanthari officer raised his massive hand. But Master Sergeant, these methods seem dishonorable. Sumi's expression hardened. Son, there's nothing honorable about letting your people die because you were too proud to fight dirty. Honor is for peacetime. War is about coming home alive. The techniques she taught were simple, brutal, and effective. How to turn civilian infrastructure into weapons. How to use the enemy's own strengths against them. How to fight when outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. But more importantly, she taught them to think like survivors instead of soldiers. Lieutenant Commander Yunbi revolutionized galactic naval doctrine by teaching alien fleet commanders that space battles weren't elegant duels between capital ships. They were chaotic brawls where victory went to whoever was willing to sacrifice more, risk more, and endure more than their opponent thought possible. Your fleets are beautiful, she told Admiral Kwan during a strategy session above the Centauri worlds. Perfect formations, optimal firing patterns, mathematical precision in every maneuver. She pulled up tactical displays showing recent human-led victories. But beautiful fleets die just as easily as ugly ones, maybe easier, because they're predictable. Under her guidance, alien navies learned to fight like pirates instead of parade formations. They used asteroids as cover, turned cargo ships into weapons, and treated every battle like a personal insult that required immediate and violent correction. The transformation wasn't limited to tactics. Human veterans changed the very culture of galactic warfare. Captain Do-hyun spent months teaching alien engineers that the most sophisticated fortification was useless if the people defending it didn't have the will to die there. His modified bases looked like scrapyards compared to the elegant defensive works that had been falling throughout the war. But they held against assaults that had previously been unstoppable. Pretty walls don't stop ugly enemies, he explained to a group of Quillan architects. Build something that works, not something that looks good in recruitment videos. The aliens learned to create defensive positions that could be held by desperate defenders against superior numbers. Maze-like corridors that channeled enemies into kill zones. Hidden bunkers that could continue fighting even after the main position fell. Supply caches placed where they would be useful to defenders but useless to attackers. But it was the human approach to logistics that truly shocked the galactic military establishment. While alien armies required complex supply chains and months of preparation, human-led forces learned to live off the land and fight with whatever they could find. Warrant Officer Beom-seok became legendary for his ability to turn civilian materials into military weapons. He taught alien engineers to see every abandoned building as a potential fortress, every piece of scrap metal as a potential bomb, every civilian vehicle as a potential weapon platform. You think like engineers, he told a group of Velcarian technicians. Everything has to be perfect, designed for optimal performance, built to exact specifications. He picked up a broken piece of alien technology and began modifying it with simple tools. But in war, perfect is the enemy of good enough. This broken scanner can be turned into a proximity detector. That damaged energy cell can become an explosive charge. Those transport containers can be armor plating. Within hours, the technicians were creating weapons and defensive systems from materials they had previously considered worthless. More importantly, they were learning to think like survivors instead of specialists. The tide of war shifted not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the introduction of concepts that advanced alien civilizations had forgotten in their pursuit of refined, efficient warfare. The mathematical models that had predicted galactic extinction were replaced by a new variable that couldn't be quantified: human stubbornness. The Devourers found themselves facing not the predictable, sophisticated resistance they had been designed to overcome, but an enemy that fought with principles that predated civilization, an enemy that treated every battle not as a problem to be solved, but as a test of will to be won. News of victory after victory spread through the galactic communication networks. Worlds that had been preparing for evacuation began to hope for survival. Species that had accepted extinction as inevitable started planning for the future. The Cosmic Council reconvened 6 months after the first human veterans had answered the call to arms. The chamber that had once echoed with despair now buzzed with cautious optimism. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, the galaxy was winning. Ambassador Taiho stood before the assembled representatives, no longer the representative of a minor species but the voice of the beings who had taught the galaxy how to fight. "Honored counselors," he began, "the reports from all sectors show the same pattern. Human-led forces are achieving victories that our computers still calculate as impossible. The Devourer advance has been halted on 17 fronts and reversed on 9 others." High Chancellor Baek leaned forward. "What do you attribute this success to, Ambassador?" Taiho smiled, thinking of old soldiers scattered across the galaxy, teaching advanced civilizations how to fight like their ancestors had fought with rocks and sticks. "We reminded the galaxy of something it had forgotten, Chancellor. Wars aren't won by the side with the best technology or the most elegant strategies. They're won by the side that refuses to quit, when quitting would be the smart thing to do." He looked around the chamber, at beings whose civilizations spanned thousands of worlds. Your species reached for the stars and built wonders that defy imagination. But in becoming civilized, you forgot that sometimes survival requires you to be uncivilized. Sometimes you have to fight like animals to preserve what makes you more than animals. The session that followed lasted until the early hours of the next day. Reports came in from across the galaxy, each one telling the same story. Human veterans and their alien students were winning battles that should have been impossible, holding positions that should have fallen, and turning defeats into victories through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept failure. As the council session ended and the representatives departed to their home worlds, one truth had become clear to every being in the galaxy. The old human soldiers hadn't just answered the call to defend civilization. They had reminded civilization what it meant to be worth defending. And across 100 star systems, veteran warriors who should have been spending their final years in peaceful retirement continued their work, teaching the galaxy's defenders that the most sophisticated weapon in the universe was the simple, stubborn determination to keep fighting when everything else had failed. The galaxy would survive not because of superior technology or mathematical precision, but because a group of old humans had remembered that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The Cosmic Council had asked for soldiers. Earth had given them something far more dangerous. Warriors who understood that defeat was just another word for giving up too soon.